When you think about presidential watches, Rolex comes to mind, Omega, but Bill Clinton wore a $70 Timex, and Barack Obama wore a Dior Grey that cost a few $100s. Again and again, presidents have made strangely modest choices, so why do the most powerful people in the world play poor? In 1953, Harry Truman hands the White House over to Eisenhower and goes home to Missouri. On his wrist, a Vulcain cricket, gold case, mechanical alarm, the distinctive sound like a cricket chirping. On the caseback, an engraving reads, "One more please." That is a photographer's phrase. The phrase of the people who constantly asked Truman to pose one more time, one more shot. The watch was a gift from the White House Photographers Association, people who saw the president more often than most of his advisors. Not a Patek, not a Cartier. Truman wore it for years, not because he could not afford something better. The cricket did something no other watch in the world could do. In 1947, Vulcain's engineers solved a problem that watchmakers had been wrestling with for decades. They created a mechanical alarm on the wrist, loud enough to actually wake a person up. Previous attempts had failed because vibration destroyed the accuracy of the movement. Vulcain solved the problem radically with two separate barrels in a single case. One barrel drives the timekeeping mechanism, the other is exclusively for the alarm. A hammer strikes a pin 1,300 times in 25 seconds. The sound is like a cricket in a metal box. For the President of the United States in 1953, this was not luxury, it was logistics. Truman's schedule meant dozens of meetings a day, flights across time zones, and negotiations where every minute had a price. A mechanical alarm on the wrist was the only reliable way not to arrive late and not to overstay. That is precisely why the Vulcain earned the nickname, the President's Watch, not through an advertising campaign, but through the real use of people for whom precision was a tool, not a concept. Truman was the first, but far from the last. Now, the man who broke the tradition so sharply it caused a scandal. Bill Clinton, 1993, the inaugural ball, the most important night in any American politician's career. But on his wrist, a Timex Ironman triathlon, a plastic digital watch for $50. The Washington Post wrote that it was a plastic watch, thick as a brick and attractive as a hernia. Omega launched an advertising campaign that made a direct appeal to the president, asking him to wear something worthy of his position. Critics spoke of poor taste, of disrespect for the office, of how this simply was not done. Clinton did not change the watch, and here it is important to understand Bill. He is not a man who does not know the subject. After the presidency, he appeared publicly wearing an Elang and Solne, a Panerai, a Jaeger-LeCoultre Limited Navy SEALs edition, and an Audemars Piguet, which means the Timex at the inauguration was a conscious choice. The best confirmation of that came at the debates against Bush. The audience asked George how the economic recession had personally affected him, how he felt it, whether he understood the pain of ordinary people, and that was the moment he looked at his watch. One frame told voters more than the entire campaign, "This man is bored by your question." Bush later confirmed it. Yes, he was thinking 10 more minutes, and this nonsense will be over. One glance at a watch cost him thousands of votes. Clinton understood that a watch is a signal. If a Rolex on the president's wrist reads as the message, "I am not like you," then a Timex Ironman reads as the message, "I run in the mornings, I count calories, I am just like you." But there is a final detail that flips this entire construction. In 1994, a year after the inauguration, Clinton gradually stopped wearing the Timex in public. He appeared with a different watch. The Timex had done its job, then it left, like an advertising spot pulled from the air after the election is won. Years later, Clinton donated several of his Ironmans to the Smithsonian Institution, where they are now museum exhibits. They are artifacts of one of the most precise political communications in the history of American elections. Hollywood read this logic faster than most political scientists. In House of Cards, Frank Underwood, a congressman from South Carolina, methodically destroying everyone on his path to the White House, wears simple, inconspicuous watches. And in Veep, the comedy about Vice President Selena Meyer, there is a scene where the staff panics because she was photographed with a watch that looks too expensive for Ohio voters. Clinton knew this intuitively. The Timex Iron Man is not simply cheap, it is an image, and the image worked. Eisenhower, President of the United States from 1953 to 1961. Five-star general, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. On his wrist, again a Vulcain cricket. He had worn it before the presidency and continued to wear it in the White House. But in 1956, something unexpected happened. A press conference. Eisenhower announces new tariffs on imported Swiss watches, protection for the American watch industry, and suddenly, the cricket on his wrist begins to chirp. That distinctive mechanical sound was recognized immediately by every journalist in the room, because the Vulcain cricket had a very specific sound, unmistakable. The President of the United States announces tariffs against Switzerland, and his own Swiss watch interrupts the speech. Vulcain did not let the moment pass. The next day, an advertising campaign appeared with the slogan, "Do as Ike does. Wear what the president wears." This was not planned public relations. It was a gift from fate, and Vulcain took it with both hands. But there is something deeper in this episode than an anecdote. Eisenhower did not take the cricket off after that incident. That is the real signal when a person with real power wears something and does not change it. After a public embarrassment, you understand that the choice was genuine. Hollywood grasped this logic more precisely than most screenwriters. When Spielberg filmed Lincoln in 2012, he had spent 12 years on research. He recreated the wallpaper, the furniture, the books in the president's study, but there is one moment that most viewers did not notice and could not have noticed, and it is the most precise thing in the entire film. The sound of a clock, the ticking of a pocket watch in several scenes, is not the sound of a prop. Sound designer Ben Burt first approached the Smithsonian Institution, where one of Lincoln's watches is held. The Smithsonian declined. The risk to the artifact was too great. Burt then found another watch at the Kentucky Historical Society. It was the very one Lincoln had with him on the night of his assassination at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. The society agreed. The watch was wound. It ran for the first time in 150 years, and Burt recorded that sound. Spielberg himself explained it. Every time you hear that quiet ticking in the film, that is Lincoln's real watch. Lincoln heard that same sound, because a watch is the only thing that continues to exist after a person is gone, unchanged. A presidential speech is rewritten by historians. Decisions are reinterpreted. An image is edited by time. But the watch ticks the same way it ticked then. The same mechanism, the same rhythm. Truman, Eisenhower, Clinton, Bush, Obama, all of them are already in the history books, but their watches still exist in museums, in archives, in presidential libraries, and each of them is still saying something to those who know how to listen. Spielberg knew how. That is why he recorded the sound of the real one. But let us recall the president for whom the lesson about a watch came not from time, but from his father. To understand why Bush the younger wore a Timex, you need to go back to those 1992 debates. Bush the elder looked at his watch and lost the election. His son drew a conclusion, but a different one from Clinton's. Bill decided a watch is a signal. Put on something cheap and you look like a man of the people. Bush the younger decided differently. A watch is discipline and respect for the people around you. He was fanatical about punctuality. His advisor said he believes that being late is rudeness. Meetings did not run over schedule. On one occasion, he felt it necessary to explain to the press why he was 3 minutes late. "I come in to work a little before 7 in the morning, and I expect people to be on time," he said in interviews. His schedule was divided into 10-minute blocks. Meetings started early and ended on time. A man with that philosophy of time wears a Timex Indiglo for $43, with an American flag at 12 o'clock. For him, the watch is an instrument of precision, not of display, but at the same time, something more. Timex did not begin as a civilian brand. During the Second World War, the company manufactured timers for bombs and artillery shells. In Vietnam, soldiers bought them in bulk at PX stores, not because they were ordered to, but because they worked in the jungle, in the rain, after being dropped. This is the watch that ordinary American soldiers wore at war, not an officer with a Rolex, a private from the PX. And that is when the slogan was born. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking. They threw Timex watches into washing machines, attached them to pneumatic drills, tied them to divers jumping from cliffs 27 meters high. After every test, the watch kept running, a flag on the dial and a wartime DNA inside. Bush was not simply wearing a cheap watch, he was wearing his people's watch. And there is one more detail. The Bush Presidential Center still sells a replica of that Timex with the American flag on the dial and the president's signature on the caseback for $69.99. The cheapest souvenir from a presidential library, and probably the most accurate portrait of the man who commissioned it. Bush turned his into a $70 souvenir. Clinton turned his into a museum exhibit. Both correctly understood that a cheap watch can speak louder than an expensive one. They simply each put a different message into it. August 2007, Barack Obama is not yet president, still a candidate, celebrating his 46th birthday. The Secret Service agents protecting him during the campaign gave him a watch, a Jorg Gray JG6500, black dial, chronograph, Japanese movement. On the dial, the official Secret Service emblem. Price without the emblem, $325. But there is a detail that makes this gift something more than a gesture. The Secret Service did not simply buy some watch from a shop, they wore this watch themselves. The JG6500 was part of the agent's uniform, reliable, inconspicuous, accurate. Sold exclusively through the Secret Service's internal store, inaccessible to the general public. The idea behind the gift was specific, so that the president and his security detail would wear the same watch, the same object on the wrist of the person being protected and the people doing the protecting. Obama had noticed the watch earlier on the wrist of one of the agents. He asked about it, they remembered. He wore it to the inauguration on January 20th, 2009. He wore it throughout both terms, at meetings with Chinese President Hu Jintao, at the United Nations General Assembly, at the second inauguration. He always rolled up his sleeves, and the watch was visible, large, black, plainly not a luxury piece. Journalists wrote articles, collectors discussed it. Jorg Gray, a California brand that until 2007 had made promotional watches for corporations, suddenly received global recognition. Sales soared. They added 60 authorized dealers, they opened retail, but Obama was not advertising the watch. He was simply wearing a gift from people he trusted with his life. That is a fundamentally different type of signal from Clinton's. Clinton wore the Timex to tell voters, "I am like you." That was communication outward, to an audience. Obama wore the Jorg Gray to tell specific people, "I remember where this came from." That was communication inward, to a team. After the presidency, Obama moved to a Rolex Cellini, white gold, no date, minimalist. In watch circles, it is now simply called the Obama. It appeared on camera alongside Prince Harry at the Invictus Games, and those who knew recognized it immediately. But the Jorg Gray is remembered differently, not as a president's watch, but as the watch of a man who wore the same thing as the people he trusted most. And one more detail. After the Cellini, Obama is now increasingly increasingly photographed with an ordinary New Balance sports watch. Not a Rolex, not a Jorg Gray, just a running watch. That is the reverse journey from Clinton. Obama returned to a simple watch when power was no longer needed. A cheap watch on a president's wrist is a decision. Each one was saying something about power. But what does a cheap watch mean on the wrist of a billionaire? Press play on the next video to find out.